Hello, church. So we just finished up John Pusey's service and wanted to go ahead and get in a devotional. I had mentioned for Fridays, as we finished up Psalm 41, that today we're not going to actually be doing a psalm. We're going to be talking about the book of Psalms, which is actually divided into five different books. So the end of 41 is the culmination of our first book. Psalms 3 to 41 are attributed, I'm trying to find the right words for how to frame this. It's based around an understanding of those Psalms as being in the Davidic line. You might sometimes see different ascriptions at the beginning, but then we hit a second piece of Davidic lineage as well. And that's from 42 through 72. At the end of 72, if you're curious to take a look, it actually talks about it phrases along the lines of here ends the readings of David in the line of Jesse, something like that, and then you see the start for book 3. So book 3 goes from 73 to 89. And then we have for book 4, it goes from 90 to 106. And then our final book, 105, goes from 107 to 150. There's a couple of things that you'll see and that impact that tradition. One of those names that you might run across is Asaph, who is one of the Levitical lines. So the Asaphites were some of the priestly scribes who would be using these psalms as a part of their worship and sharing with the church. You'll also hear Korah, Korah, and the Korahites, which is another attribution that we'll see at the beginning of several psalms. There are psalms after those sections that will be attributed to David, but just included, but because the tradition was not holding them in with these other pieces. That's a very poor explanation. There's also, as we've seen, kind of different categories of like prayers for sin or deliverance coming from the Psalms. I've also mentioned the penitential Psalms, which are not grouped together but spread throughout. One of my favorite sections does fall together, and those are the songs of ascent. And so the belief is that those were psalms that would be used by pilgrims to Jerusalem. And I think the setup was basically for every step that they would climb, they would recite another song of ascent. So it's just this image of us being drawn up into the presence of God through these things. I've been using Eugene Peterson's The Message as a part of this. I have an affinity for Peterson's translation of the Psalms. I have not read before and did not share with you, but he actually does an introduction coming in, and it's not short, but I did want to share it with you, and some good bits from him, just talking about his motivation in wanting to do the message, and he uses the phrase having it be in contemporary idiom, and he talks a little bit about that. To this, a word from Peterson for us. Most Christians, for most of the Christian centuries, have learned to pray by praying the Psalms. The Hebrews, with several centuries of a head start on us in matters of prayer and worship, provided us with this prayer book that gives us a language adequate for responding to God who speaks to us. The stimulus to paraphrase the Psalms into a contemporary idiom comes from my lifetime of work as a pastor. As a pastor, I was charged with, among other things, teaching people to pray, helping them to give voice to the entire experience of being human, and to do it both honestly and thoroughly. I found that it was not as easy as I expected. Getting started is easy enough. The impulse to pray is deep within us, at the very center of our creative being, and so practically anything will do to get us started. Help and thanks are our basic prayers. But honesty and thoroughness don't come quite as spontaneously. Faced with the prospect of conversation with a holy God who speaks worlds into being, it is not surprising that we have trouble. We feel awkward and out of place. I'm not good enough for this. I'll wait until I clean up my act and prove that I'm a decent person. Or we excuse ourselves on the grounds that our vocabulary is inadequate. Give us a few months or years to practice prayers that are polished enough for such a sacred meeting. Then I won't feel so stuttery and ill at ease. My usual response when presented with these difficulties is to put the Psalms in a person's hand and say, "Go home and pray these." You've got wrong ideas about prayer. The praying you find in these Psalms will dispel the wrong ideas and introduce you to the real thing. A common response of those who do what I ask is surprise. They don't expect this kind of thing in the Bible. And then I express surprise at their surprise. Did you think these would be the prayers of nice people? Did you think the psalmist's language would be polished and polite? Untutored, we tend to think that prayer is what good people do when they are doing their best. It is not. Inexperienced, we suppose that there must be an insider language that must be acquired before God takes us seriously in our prayer. There is not. Prayer is elemental, not advanced language. It is the means by which our language becomes honest, true, and personal in response to God. It is the means by which we get everything in our lives out in the open before God. But even with the Psalms in their hands and my pastoral encouragement, people often tell me they still don't get it. In English translation, the Psalms often sound smooth and polished, sonorous with Elizabethan rhythms and diction. As literature, they are beyond compare. But as prayer, as the utterances of men and women passionate for God in moments of anger and praise and lament, these translations miss something. Grammatically, they are accurate. The scholarship undergirding the translations is superb and devout, but as prayers, they are not quite right. The Psalms in Hebrew are earthy and rough. They are not genteel. They are not the prayers of nice people couched in cultured language. And so in my pastoral work of teaching people to pray, I started paraphrasing the Psalms into the rhythms and idiom of contemporary English. I wanted to provide men and women access to the immense range and the terrific energies of prayer in the kind of language that is most immediate to them, which also happens to be the language in which these psalm prayers were first expressed and written by David and his successors. I continue to want to do that, convinced that only as we develop raw honesty and detailed thoroughness in our praying do we become whole, truly human in Jesus Christ, who also prayed the Psalms. Neat bit from him, and we'll be getting started back on Psalm 42, so in book 2 for Monday. We continue our sermon series during Lent on 1 Thessalonians, and so we're stepping into the 3rd chapter on Monday. Look forward to seeing you then. We'll hopefully see some of you tomorrow, and God's blessings. Keep praying.